Okay, everyone, welcome back. We are very excited about this session. If you have questions, which you probably will, you'll get to ask Elizabeth in the chat. So just pull down the chat, ask Elizabeth. So please, let's welcome WKOW's very own Bob Linde Mayer.
Thank you, Peterson, and welcome everybody to this presentation on broadcast meteorologists and what you can do to assist them in climate change communication. A little bit of a background on myself. I've been a broadcast meteorologist now for 40 years, so I'm on the tail end of my career. But the way that I got to be here today talking to you is been a process. It started about 6 years ago. Climate scientists had been giving presentations and had been giving me information and other meteorologists information about their concerns, but I was struggling with finding a way to relay those concerns to the general public because I was becoming more and more alarmed about what climate scientists were saying, but I wasn't seeing the same level of concern with the general public. So I started to think about that. What can I do to help out in that situation? So I got my toes in the water, so to speak, about 6 years ago. And it was actually through my church, my Lutheran church. There was a Care of Creation team that was doing a little bit of climate change communication work. So I joined that team, and that's how I first got involved with communication. I was speaking to congregations about climate change. And that was going pretty well. I was given a number of talks, but one thing I encountered was people afterwards saying, well, Bob, what can we do about this? I was ending my presentations with, well, you should reduce your carbon footprint. But people are saying, what more can you do? And I started thinking to myself, yeah, that's a good question. What more can we do? So on my own, I just started doing research and came up with carbon fee dividend as, to me, the obvious way to make a big difference in our climate and in solving this problem that we're experiencing. And from there, that led me to Citizens Climate Lobby. So I joined CCL about 5 years ago and have been involved with CCL ever since. I've also, in this time span now, about 6 years, given about 120 presentations. So I've given a lot of them. But I also started getting my toes in the water with giving presentations on air. Now that was a more significant challenge for me. I made an assumption, which proved to be unfounded, that my management would not want me talking about such a controversial subject. But to my pleasant surprise, my management was supportive and said, yeah, go for it. So I did. And so I've been giving presentations not only directly to people, but also on the air as well. So that's how I got to be where I am at this stage of the game. Just so you know, this presentation is about 15 minutes. I want to save a lot of time for you to ask your questions via chat. But I'm going to go ahead now and go to my presentation. So broadcast meteorologists communicate complex concepts in easy to understand terms. Okay, we do that every day. As meteorologists, we not only talk about what the weather is doing, but why it's doing that. And so that does require this ability to communicate fairly complex concepts. Now our job is to be the nice, friendly person, folks invited into your homes. But given the number of Americans that are skeptical about climate change, we need to get the proper science out to the public. One thing that we as broadcast meteorologists have to realize, though, is we just have to be careful not to mix too much physical science with political science. That's the one rule that my news director said. Bob, you can talk about climate science, but don't get into politics at all. And unfortunately, when you talk about our bill, even though we're bipartisan and all that, they consider that to be political. So even though I talk about climate science on the air, I do not talk about our carbon fee and dividend bill on the air. I leave that for my presentations that I give directly to people. Now, broadcast meteorologists are uniquely positioned to educate the public about climate change. We are trusted sources who have extraordinary access to the public. We tend to be highly talented, at least many of us, and we're well-engaged science communicators. So we have this ability, again, we're trusted by the public, we have this ability to communicate, and we're very active and have access to new and effective communication platforms, not often reached by climate scientists. I must say, climate scientists are getting better and better about communicating their research, but many still struggle with that. But so this is where we can really step in and help by these three reasons in terms of climate change education. Broadcast meteorologists' views on climate change have been evolving rapidly. The last survey that was done, and you can see it on the left, a 2017 national survey of broadcast meteorologists. What those findings found was more than 90% of broadcast meteorologists believe climate change is happening, and approximately 80% that human-caused climate change is happening. These percentages, I should mention, have gone up steadily over the years. 10 years ago, they were probably a good 30% less than what you're seeing there. So we've definitely been seeing a good trend with broadcast meteorologists accepting climate scientists and the fact that it's human-induced climate change that's occurring. 62% of broadcast meteorologists believe that climate change has changed in their communities over the last 50 years. So well over a majority recognize climate change has had effects locally. Nearly 60% are at least somewhat interested in reporting on air about projected climate change impacts. Now I would say even though 60% are interested, that does not mean 60% are actually doing it. And we'll get into that a little bit more. 77% are interested in reporting on a range of local impacts. Nearly half indicate that they have reported on the local impacts of climate change on social media. That's the other big avenue here. Some might not be able to present climate change information on air. Their news director might not allow it, but they can get that education out through social media. So that's another area to watch for in your local broadcast area with your broadcast meteorologists. Just to get into this a little bit more, interest in presenting climate topics on air. So it's categorized into two areas. Very interested to slightly interested. Now in the survey, they actually have 4 levels of interest, but I've grouped it all into one, and then not at all interested. So the topic, local historical climate statistics. 83.1% are interested in doing that. Not at all interested, just a small minority. However, we've always been giving local historic climate statistics. I mean, there's nothing controversial about that really. When it starts to get a little bit more challenging is when you start to talk about current local climate change impacts. When you go from climate to climate change, that changes the ballgame for a broadcast meteorologist. But even having said that, interest level 76% in presenting local climate change impacts. But those not interested starts to grow a little bit. Local adaptation efforts to the effects of climate change. About the same, 76%, and so it's about the same as for climate change impacts locally. Local mitigation efforts. So again, what should we do to recognize the climate change as occurring and to deal with the effects that have happened up to now? Might be infrastructure or other things. 72.8%. So I think you're getting the idea here. There is a very high level of interest. Last one I have, and this is probably the most controversial, future projected local climate change impacts. That's where you start to get a lot of pushback. But still, broadcast meteorologists are interested, either slightly to very, overwhelmingly interested. Even though those not interested at all, it starts to grow a bit. So you can see that there's a lot of interest with broadcast meteorologists to talk about different aspects of climate change. However, you're not seeing 70% of broadcast meteorologists actually do this. So what's going on? What is the problem here? Well, there are barriers. Barriers faced by broadcast meteorologists wanting to report on climate change. What's the barriers? One is lack of time to prepare material. Most broadcast meteorologists are really busy in their day. TV stations have cut back staff. Broadcast broadcast teams have been cut back. So they're just, a lot of them are just trying to keep their head above water and preparing their day-to-day shows. And some have many shows that they have to do. So that's one challenge. Lack of presentation time within their broadcast. This is a big one too. We only have generally between about 2.5 and 3.5 minutes to give our weather presentation and forecast. And when weather gets active, you got a lot you're trying to cram in. So trying to set aside time to talk about climate change is an issue as well. Not enough knowledge about climate science. This is an important one. Keep in mind, broadcast meteorologists, our specialty is weather. Talking about the weather over the next 7 days, talking about weather systems. Climate, which is long-term, we're talking decades to centuries, is a completely different ballgame, a completely different knowledge set. So meteorologists have to take the time to educate themselves, which is something that I've been doing over the years. So if you're not knowledgeable enough about climate science, then you're not comfortable broadcasting about climate change. Because when you talk about it, you have to really understand it inside and out. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to do it. Keep in mind that when we're on the air talking, and this is live, we can't say, oh, I didn't like that. I want to start over. So you got to be able to keep your smoothness of your overall presentation going when you're talking about climate change. And I can tell you from personal experience, when I first started talking about climate change on air, it was not as smooth as I had hoped. It took time for me to get comfortable with it. But here's one of the big ones: resistance from management. They perceive climate change science as controversial, whether it really is or not, okay? And resistance can come from many levels. It can come from the station group that TV station is part of. Most TV stations are part of large groups. Some of those groups are very conservative, as you might imagine, and some have a dictate. Our meteorologists cannot talk about climate change. Or it can come from the station manager, from the local owner, or from the news director. All of those can put a roadblock in the way of a broadcast meteorologist. And I've spoken to many that have that situation to deal with. Some of them get around it they do allow them to talk on social media. But trying to talk on air is a challenge for some. I'm lucky. I have a management that has been fully backed me up. Fear that viewers will complain, and they will complain. Especially when I first started talking about this on air, I got a lot of emails, a lot of nasty emails. Even though deniers make up, about 5% according to the Six Americas, they are a very vocal minority, and you're going to hear from them. So you have to be prepared for that. You have to have a thick skin. But most of us do have thick skins because we get complaints about our day-to-day weather, much less talk about climate change. But some fear they're actually going to lose their jobs, especially those that are just getting into the business. It's a competitive business. You need to be liked by your viewers. Otherwise, they're going to find the management that viewers do like. So there's that concern as well, especially for those starting off in the business. So there's barriers. So now I think you might have an understanding. Yeah, I can see why there's some issues with not everybody talking about it. But there's also a lot of help out there. One big one, huge one, is that we have access to peer-reviewed, hyper-local climate change graphics from a nonprofit called Climate Central. Here's an example of one that I've used on the air for Madison, and this is all prepared. They look great. You can just pop them on in your presentation, and away you go. So that you don't really have to spend much time preparing. Now you have to understand climate science. You have to be able to back up what this graphic is saying. And you'll notice, by the way, Madison, since 1970, has seen the average annual temperature increased 3 degrees Fahrenheit compared to the world, which is at 1.8. So much of the northern United States, Madison is ahead of the curve, unfortunately. Just one more example of, and this is another one I've shown on air, less extreme cold. This one always gets me every time I see it. Lowest temperature each year. I know I'm digressing a little bit, but I'm just giving you a little education. In Madison, the average coldest temperature used to be 22 degrees below zero in 1970. Now it's about 12 degrees below zero. So the average coldest temperature has increased 10 degrees in just about a 50-year period of time. And that has all kinds of implications. So anyway, this is a great resource for broadcast meteorologists to use. The American Meteorological Society, which is this professional organization that I'm part of, is very involved in education efforts on climate change. The society gets it. Human-induced climate change is happening. And it's to the extent that there's an AMS committee on the station scientist. This is a committee that I'm part of. The mission is to provide fellow broadcasters with the latest scientific information about the atmosphere and climate, and to empower and inspire them to educate their viewers. So it's a team of about 12 of us. We're all broadcast meteorologists, and we're always thinking of ways to help fellow broadcast meteorologists talk about climate change. When we have our annual conferences, we give a lot of presentations about climate change and how they can do presentations on air. But there's CCL. As you know, we're a large organization, and there's a lot that CCL can do to help the cause. So how can CCL members most effectively engage broadcast meteorologists in their local media market? Let's get into that. First of all, you need to get contact information. Get contact info for everyone on the broadcast meteorologist team, the news director, and the station manager. Search for their email, phone number, Twitter handles, LinkedIn pages. The station website is a good source. So get that information. It's easily out there to get. Learn about each person. Just as we do research on a member of Congress before meeting with him or her, use what you can from your research to help you build relationships as you reach out. Station management and broadcast meteorologists are very sensitive to viewer feedback. Use all the contact channels you have and express how important it is to you that they practice climate change education both on air and through social media. This really helped me when I first started speaking out. By the way, my local CCL chapter sent emails, and the management was like, wow, we're getting all these emails about Bob talking about climate change. And that just helped me continue that effort. Watch the station for any mention of climate change on air or in social media, and respond as soon as possible with strong words of thanks for their effort. This email should go to the meteorologist, the news director, and the station manager. Okay, this is so important. Again, they are very sensitive to this. So if you show support, that will help that meteorologist. If they put their toe in the water, maybe they've been thinking, well, okay, I'm gonna give this a little bit of a try. I'm gonna talk a little bit about climate change. If the local chapter sends all kinds of emails into the station, the meteorologist gonna say, wow, this is great. The management's gonna say this is great. And they're on their way in really getting involved. If you like this idea of getting involved, you can take it to another level. You can join the CCL BCL, Business Climate Leaders Meteorologists Action Team. Now you see a URL at the bottom. Hopefully we're going to be able to show you that in the chat area, so you can copy and paste that and be able to contact us. But it's in CCL Community, so when you get to this page, just look for the join button, and you can join and be part of this action team. And what that would really be cool, I think, is that you can become the leader in your chapter of this effort. Become part of the team, and as that, you can help further. So join the CCL, BCL Meteorologists Action Team. We're launching a pilot program to help multiple chapters develop relationships with their local broadcast meteorologists. Okay, so you can get on the ground floor of this program. Our first monthly call is July 15th at 8 p.m. and it'll be the third Wednesday of every month. So hopefully you can become involved, and I hope that's the case. Okay, so that's my presentation, Peterson. And now I'm ready to take questions.
That's great. And Elizabeth Dell is going to ask you the questions that she's been collating. Elizabeth?
Sure. So first of all, real quickly, could you say again which folks at the TV station people should contact to show thanks or, about their interest in covering climate?
Sure. It's the team. The number one contact should be that meteorologist broadcast team. Usually it's a 3 or 4 member team. And if you go to the station website, there's contact information. You'll find that email, and email the team. And then also management. So try to communicate with the news director and the station manager, and also let them know that you appreciate the efforts. Or it can be, hey, why am I not hearing anything? Okay, if they're not doing anything, you can try to nudge them along nicely. I would suggest not showing that it's an organized effort. Keep CCL out of it. Just respond as individual viewer. But if we get a lot of CCL members doing that, I think that'll really help.
Good tip. And also, so when they do reach out, would you suggest educating them about carbon pricing, or just really focusing on, encouraging them to talk about climate change?
I was taking a step at a time here. Just if they haven't said anything about climate change on the air, nothing through social media, you just want them to start using the word climate change in their broadcasts. That's a big thing. Climate change. Climate's one thing. Climate change, that's when you're getting into that controversial area, so to speak. So just get them talking about it. Most are aware of the resources that are out there, Climate Central, so they can do it, but they just need that nudge.
Okay. And so you referenced Climate Central. Are there other sources that you would recommend we refer our local our local broadcasters or meteorologists to?
Well, if they're part of the AMS, I would have them try to contact this team, the Station Scientist Committee team that I'm part of. We're there to help them, and we'll have their back. So suggest that to them if they're part of the AMS to reach out to us, and we'll definitely try to help them.
Okay. And someone was wondering if you have ever tried to present any of the AMS bulletin attribution studies, I assume meaning during your broadcast.
I have not tried to do attribution studies on air yet. I've done them in my presentations directly to groups when I'm speaking. I have given those attribution studies. Yeah, because that's one thing that we have to be very careful about, either as CCL members or as broadcast meteorologists. When a severe weather event happens, you have to be very careful in trying to attribute climate change to that, because almost never is it strictly because of climate change. It's a very complicated, there are complicated processes involved. But these attribution studies, they're peer reviewed and are really valuable. But no, at this point, I have not done attribution studies. Not to say that in the future I will not. When I speak about climate change on air, a lot of times it's due to a significant weather event that's occurred. Okay, we might have had a flooding rain event, or some area might be in the middle of a heat wave. Then I will take some time and educate the viewers, okay, this is how climate change could be a contributing factor to that weather event that we're experiencing locally. And it's all about local. I really don't do anything on a national scale, except if it's sometimes like the fires in California or the fires in Australia. I touched on that. But otherwise, all my climate change education efforts is in that local perspective. And again, that's where these climate central graphics are so essential for me to do that.
Okay. All right. I think we have time probably for one more question. There's a grad student studying meteorology and is wondering how they might best contribute to communication of climate change in the field.
So it's a grad student in meteorology right now? Is
Yes.
that what I heard? I would say do what every other CCL member is going to try to do. But that member can converse with that meteorologist at a higher level, okay? And show them studies. If that meteorologist is kind of lukewarm, giving them pushback a little bit, use your education as a meteorologist to show them how that climate science is really working. So just do that, I think would be very effective.
Okay. All right. We're about out of time, right, Morgan?
Yeah, thank you so much, Bob, for your wonderful presentation. We had so many great questions. I posted the link to the CCL community forums in the chat if you wanted to ask those questions that weren't answered today there. We are going to have a 10-minute break, and then we will go into our next session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Citizens Climate Lobby's training program. You can tune into more episodes anywhere podcasts are available. Inspired by what you heard today? Join Citizens Climate Lobby to advocate for bipartisan climate solutions. Go to community.citizensclimate.org to find more trainings, resources, your local chapter, national action teams, discussion forums, and more. Be sure to like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and Instagram @CitizensClimate. We also invite all of our listeners to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiration. And together, we are creating the political will for a livable world.